Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole, Lore and Fray, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. With Fire Emblem Engage right out around the corner, I've been thinking a little bit about the current state of the Fire Emblem franchise and kind of thinking about the interesting turn it's had over the past decade. As all of you know, Fire Emblem initially was a very niche, fringe Nintendo RPG franchise that just kind of existed. It was like relatively low key. It wasn't all that successful. It had like a small following, especially in Japan, but it never really made its way overseas. And for a long time, nobody even knew what it was, right? If it wasn't for Marth and Roy being in Super Smash Bros. Melee, it's likely we wouldn't have even gotten Fire Emblem 7 over here in 2003, a full decade after the series premiered. And for a long time after that, these games continued getting made. They continued having all these issues. Radiant Dawn had glitches and stuff like that. It was buggy. You had this very strong following. And then it exploded. 20 years after the franchise's inception, Fire Emblem 11, right? The 11th game in the series, Awakening, right? A game so grand that it defined the 3DS generation. It was one of the best games on the console, one of the best strategy RPGs ever made, like a shiny example of taking everything that everyone loved about the older games and really putting it all in a blender and just making something wonderful out of it. This was, I think, and still is, probably the quintessential Fire Emblem game. It is absolutely the Fire Emblem game you should start with. It is one of my favorite games of all time. I love this game to death, but like it's interesting to kind of look back on this moment for a lot of reasons. For one thing, how long it took for this to happen. Like, people don't really think about this, but it took 20 years of solid Fire Emblem games in order for this franchise to finally find its footing and become like highly successful, right? There was some talk early on in Awakening's development that like if the game didn't sell a certain amount, I believe like 250,000 units, they were going to seriously consider not making them anymore. Like this was going to be like the final Fire Emblem game, and they were really like they put everything they had into it, and they ended up making it a success. Like to think that this franchise was on the brink of being shelved before like coming back in full force with like this stellar entry, it's interesting to think about because it goes to show you how success can come from like unexpected places, because like Awakening fundamentally doesn't do all that much different than I think previous games in in the series. Like it has the same kind of mechanics, it has the same kind of features, it has the same kind of gameplay, but like they really, over a period of games, over a period of like decades, they were able to build an audience, and like everything just came together, and the series just exploded in popularity because of word of mouth and just like positive coverage, a positive coverage that the gaming journalism industry really strongly struggled to downplay, honestly. And I think that's a really interesting thing to bring up because it's going to happen again. Yeah, probably with like Splatoon, or probably with like something like ARMS, or some of these other Nintendo Switch IPs, some of these newer Nintendo games, Animal Crossing, I think, went through a similar process. Like, people don't understand that these games are good, that they're getting fans, that they're building momentum, and that eventually, because of that momentum, because of how like dedicated Nintendo is in making high quality products, and how people will continue playing these games and discovering these games years after they come out, that it's very likely that something like Splatoon is going to explode in popularity at some point, far beyond what Fire Emblem Awakening did. Like, a lot of people think Splatoon has like peaked, that it's like stopped evolving, that it's stopped doing anything new or interesting. I think differently. I think we are in this stage where like this IP is like first being introduced, and Nintendo is trying to figure out what they want to do with it, and where they want to take it from here, and what works and what doesn't work, and what they want to introduce next, and things like that. Like Nintendo is really has this great IP on their hands, but it has It was initially very successfully downplayed by the gaming media. Like back when Splatoon first premiered, it was like compared negatively to Overwatch. Like why would I buy a Wii U for this colorful shooter when I can play this other colorful shooter on consoles, like on other consoles, even though that like Overwatch is nowhere near as good or memorable or creative or unique. Oh, it's much more mainstream, so I'll just play that. People don't really think about like the fact that like Splatoon is a wholly original new IP. Like they don't think about how much better it is than Overwatch. And I think the fact that Overwatch has fallen by the wayside while Splatoon has like stayed relatively popular, I think that's a very strong indication of where things are going in the very near future. I think Splatoon is going to stay like about the same level of popularity until like it suddenly explodes. I'm talking like Animal Crossing numbers. Like I think Splatoon does absolutely have the potential to be an IP that sells like 40 million units an entry, right? I do think absolutely think it should do that. The issue has always been just poor coverage from gaming journalism and YouTubers doing everything in their power to kind of downplay the game to their audience, shilling things like Fall Guys and Fortnite instead. And I think that's kind of like an interesting issue going into this is that like Splatoon isn't competing against other $60 full price games. It's competing against free to play stuff. It's competing against like Game Pass. It's competing against like mobile games and like really generic Call of Duty clones and Overwatch, which I believe is free to download. I It's competing against all these things that are just trying to get you to sign on and trying to get you to buy battle passes and pay for microtransactions and do all this stuff. While Splatoon is just a $60 game, right? And again, like I think a lot of the kids who would enjoy Splatoon like don't necessarily play can't afford $60 games. Like for a parent, it's like more practical to just sit them in front of like a tablet or something. Like that's the grim reality we're in. But like I think more and more that Splatoon is a phenomenon waiting to happen. I don't think Splatoon's phenomenon phase has hit us yet. Like it's weird looking at this now, but I I think that the people who are playing Splatoon are introducing Splatoon to like people they know and people who just see it in action. I have shown Splatoon to women who have never heard of it before and were just like blown away by this. Like, wow, this is the new Nintendo game. It looks so cool. Like I've seen people have that reaction. I have never seen such a reaction out of like showing people like a Nintendo IP or stuff like that. Like I know these people would like Fire Emblem and stuff like that. Um, but Splatoon has like this universal like appeal to it. You can look at that game and understand how much fun that would be, right? To be one of these squid kids, like firing these guns and like with this wide range of which, but like it's insane. It is a lot of fun, but because we're in a gaming industry that does not value fun, we value. Oh well, they value like the gaming journalism values like the amount of money a game makes and how much it can do, covering it can do for them, right? Like Darkside Phil will kind of acknowledge this on his streams, like when he talks about like he doesn't care how fun a game is. What he cares about is engagement and how much money people are giving his way. That's what motivates Darkside Phil. Like when it comes to IGN, like they care about sponsorship deals and getting free stuff from the big companies. When it comes to like these other YouTubers, they're big on like pushing conspiracies and like hardware console wars and just all this nonsense. Like downplaying legitimately good games because Nintendo isn't sponsoring them. And we've seen that happen over and over and over again, and it's getting very tiresome. But the thing is, it's not going to last forever. Much like how the GameCube had a reputation for not having a lot of good RPGs in spite of having Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, which was one of the best games of all time, I think Splatoon is going to go down a similar path in which it has a lot of really well received, highly selling, highly rated games that cultivate a dedicated following and then one day, for no reason at all, it just explodes and becomes a phenomenon. That's what I expect to happen. I don't think there's anything that could. I don't think there's anything that the industry can do to stop it. I don't think there's really anything that the industry can do to stop Nintendo at this point because they're not going out of business. They're not leaving the hardware space. They're not like doing whatever that Sony wanted them to do. They took on the entire gaming industry and won. That's the reality we're in 2023 is that like there's a handful of like opponents that are still like somewhat relevant. Steam still exists, mobile gaming still exists, but when it comes to like games like this, like real full price games with like all these crazy features without that don't require these microtransactions or like Nintendo is the dominant sphere, the dominant competitor in that sphere, and nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to admit that Nintendo is the only company producing real games. And I think it's only a matter of time until the vast majority of the population begin to notice and accept it.